And for more insights into this turmoil, we're now joined by Professor Mason Richey. He's an associate professor of international policy at the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Professor Richey, we just heard from our correspondent there. The defense minister has tendered his resignation. He has said he's taking responsibility for all that has gone wrong the last day or so. If he resigns, does it mean the president and the rest of the cabinet does not also need to resign to take responsibility?
Well, I mean, I think clearly the president is under enormous pressure to resign, not only from the opposition party, that would be totally normal, but I think even within his own party, which is, however, split. I think that there are some members of the party who are trying to find some way to bring this to a resolution through his resignation, and others perhaps who are willing to take a gamble on what happens in an impeachment process. And then there's the question of the rest of the cabinet. And that I think we don't have an answer to, in part because it's a little bit unclear now what the cabinet knew and which members knew and what they knew before this martial law was decreed yesterday evening. And so I think until that gets fully settled, we're not going to be entirely sure what the responsibility is of the cabinet, other than, of course, the defense minister who has tendered his resignation and apologized, and has now had articles of impeachment filed against him also. And right now those are still valid because he has not yet had his resignation accepted by the president. So until that's accepted, he's actually still in his position. And then, we don't know which of the other cabinet ministers knew what. The rumors right now seem to be that, for instance, the foreign minister and the finance minister and the prime minister were against this, but perhaps some other ministers were for it. I'm hearing, for instance, the interior minister may face impeachment articles and may himself also face treason charges, which are also perhaps being teed up against both the president and the defense minister.
Professor Richey, I realize this is speculative, but if the party wants to survive, and if, as you suggest, there were other quarters that were not in favor of imposing martial law, do they have any leverage to exercise on the president so that he resigns and therefore allows the party to deflect this blame and survive, I suppose, to vote on another day?
Yeah, does the party have any leverage? And that's a very complicated question because, among other things, the party right now isn't united, right? There are some people who, within the party, who are already looking ahead to the next election and for president, which is almost certain to happen, at some point within the next several months, regardless of whether or not Yoon steps down because he resigns or if he is impeached. So their leverage, I think, is going to be isolating him and essentially trying to balance the responsibility on him as, effectively speaking, the head of the party, although he's not technically the head of the party. That's Han Dong-hoon. But as president, of course, and the most important figure, therefore, politically in Korea, in some sense, symbolically, he's the head of the party. So they're going to want to balance between putting all of the pressure in some sense on him, but of course in some sense symbolizing the failure of the party as a whole, versus spreading some of that responsibility around, which is also normal considering that this was a cabinet, perhaps not cabinet decision, but cabinets in general take responsibility collectively for decisions, even though personally they may disapprove of a measure, and in this case, obviously a very grave one.
But Professor Richey, in a way, the only way we can have some insight into how President Yoon might act is to think about why he might have acted to do this in the first instance. Our correspondent is saying that no one in South Korea, they're wondering why he actually acted to impose martial law. This is what we can call an autogolpe. So it was a self-coup, a sitting president seizing more power for himself, often with the assistance of the military. Why do you think, and this is speculation, Mr. Yoon acted to do this in the first instance?
Yeah, so in political science, we have a term for this. We call this the personalization of power, or the personalization of executive power. And in some respect, I think I'm willing to in some way believe his reasoning, that we got in the statement justifying the martial law decree, which is to say he was frustrated about a number of things. One of them is in his estimation, unacceptable way in which the opposition party slimmed down the budget too much and made it difficult in this new budget for the state to carry out some of its functions. The way that the opposition party was attempting over time to impeach some of his senior officials multiple times, and in that sense, gummed up the legislative process in that way. In addition, they were going after his wife and other people in his administration and close to his administration, implicated in various scandals. So I think if you add all of those things together, plus what was looking at perhaps a looming impeachment for himself, I think if you add all of those together, I think that he thought that they reached a level that he considered to be "quote unquote" anti-state activity, and that was driven, again, in his estimation. And I'm going to be clear, I don't share this, but in his estimation, forces within the opposition party in the National Assembly who are working in some way on behalf of North Korea, perhaps China, and other forces. And so I think, at least in his head, perhaps as paranoid and isolated and as unpopular as he was, that all of these things sort of functioned together to lead him to take this dramatic and ill thought out step.
Professor Richey, final question. It may be in his head, but do you think this might carry the day in terms of persuading lawmakers in Parliament? His reasoning. Final question.
To impeach him,
to suggest that in fact what he did was within constitutional limits. Final question.
No, I don't think that that's the case. If for no other reason than simply, popularly, in 2024, South Koreans, the general population, aren't going to put up with this. And there's obviously the letter of the law, and that will need to be studied, by legal scholars here. And the letter of the law will need to be compared, precisely with the steps that Yoon took, and whether or not the steps that he took to decreeing martial law, including the State Council meeting, as well as informing the National Assembly immediately after the decree of martial law, whether those steps were followed correctly and legally. So essentially a process question. And then there's a second part of the question, which is to what extent was this done in good faith? And I don't think that you can make the argument ultimately that it was done in good faith just because his head had a distorted view or a diluted view of reality potentially, and therefore he believed some of those things doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good faith action, or it's one that would lead one to believe that the steps that he took were proportional to the concerns that he might have had. Lots of leaders have to deal with difficult opposition and extremely difficult and challenging political circumstances, including isolation and scandal. But the vast majority of them don't turn to martial law and a self-coup in order to personalize power and aggrandize the executive branch.
Thank you. Thanks for sparing us this time on a very busy day. Professor Mason Richey, Associate Professor of International Politics at the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies.